Hello, I'm Anwultus, and today I'm going to give you an idea, my idea, on why the central government should not prop up failing businesses. Okay? With the obvious exception of businesses that are essential for government functions, such as the military industrial complex. As much as people like to talk about the government getting away from the military industrial complex. The fact is that for the military to function, they need equipment and they need to get it from a reliable source. So the existence of a sort of semi-integrated, semi-private business force is something that is necessitated in that sector. So, of course, I'm not going to be talking about problems relating to the military industrial complex because that's something that is essential for government function. But I'm talking about other things, publicly traded companies, um, banks, small businesses, even. I don't think that the central government should support the failings of those businesses. And you might say, isn't this a bit harsh? We're in a crisis right now, you know? What about companies that would normally function fine but are now failing in a crisis? And here's what I say, okay? Business models, in order to be effective, need to stand the test of time. What we see is that a lot of the successful businesses in the world are generally going to be relatively young. There are very few businesses that make it through the centuries, very even fewer that make it through the millennia. But generally speaking, what happens is that business models that businesses are built upon either need to adapt to the changing times, because the times are changing, let's be honest here, economically speaking. There's different focuses. If you go back 1,000 years, the economy is completely different. So the times are changing. So, of course, business models have to change with them. For example, it used to be that a lot of people ordered furniture from catalogs. Now there's online versions of that. So, of course, the physical catalog is becoming less important and less relevant in business practices. There's other arguments to be made for other companies. So, of course, as the environment of a business changes, the business itself needs to change and needs to adapt to overcome the problems that it encounters. So, if you're telling me that a crisis such as the coronavirus, for example, is going to have a deleterious effect on a business, then I would say that businesses should, at least in some way, be prepared to deal with crises. If a business is not prepared to deal with a crisis, then that business, in my view, has a flawed business model. And I'm not saying that a business needs to be prepared for absolutely anything that happens, but that a business, just like private people, private persons, are advised by financial gurus like Dave Ramsey to save up money for emergencies, and to save up money in case you suddenly lose your source of income. Businesses should have a similar idea to that. That they shouldn't have to uh, be fully reliant on the turnover of let's say each quarter. They should be prepared for a prolonged period of economic hardship, which can occur and indeed has occurred this time. So, taking that into account, I'm not saying, okay, let me be very clear. Now that I've said this, I'm not saying that that the workers should simply be left to starve to death. I'm not saying that there should be no hope, no help to the businesses from any source. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it should not be the central government. Because what happens when you put the central government in there, since the central government is a very constant force in the lives of everyone within any state or country, depending on your inclination for terminology, because the central government is that constant source, what you see is that if you rely on the central government, if the businesses expect the central government to provide for them in the case of an economic downturn, then the businesses will never be prepared for an economic downturn because they know that it's somebody else's problem. But if you make it their problem, then they will be forced to create business models that actually are geared toward fixing that problem if it occurs. And I think that's a great reason why businesses should not be getting big bailouts in a crisis. So you might say, I'm not excluding help from all sources, and I'm not saying that the people in those businesses should necessarily starve. I'm just saying that it's not the central government's job to do that. So what I propose as an alternative is that it should be the local government looking at the businesses that operate in its community. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that if you put it and you centralize it, because let's say the United States is a very large country, there's millions, hundreds of millions of people in the United States of America, in these United States. Because of that, you end up with millions, hundreds of millions of people, and each person has a slightly different economic situation from the next person. So if you're going to make a plan that is trying to help people, you need to know as much as possible about the economic situation of the person you're trying to help. Now, if you have a central government do that, then what you end up with is a situation where the central government is collecting vast amounts of information about every person and every business, and many people think that that has some bad implications, and also is a situation that can easily allow for an abuse of power. But what I say is that if you localize this, if you make this your own little towns, your own communities, what you have then is, instead of trying to help millions of strangers from opposite ends of the continent, what you end up with is the people offering the help are people who have a decent chance of knowing the people they're helping. It's very easy to it's a lot easier to confirm information when you're actually living in the same community of the person that you're trying to help. And of course, different regions of a country, different geographic situations, different local legislative situations lead to different economic needs of the people living in the country, which means that it's a lot easier to tailor a plan towards the needs of the people if you're actually living in that same situation. If you're living in a situation where you can actually help the people in a way that in a manner that comes from a position of understanding their struggle, which is something that is very difficult to do if you're up in Washington or in New York and you're looking out and you're looking across the continent and you see hundreds of millions of people and they're all different from each other, but in the exact ways that they're different from each other, you can't tell because there's no way you could actually meet all those people. You need to establish a massive bureaucracy in order to accomplish this. You'd need to centralize and collect vast amounts of data about every single person in order to accomplish this, in order to actually create a system that is tailored to the needs of the individuals. But if you localize it, it's a lot easier to do. You don't need to have a huge centralized bureaucracy. You don't need to collect data from millions upon millions of people. Of course, that still happens in a way, but it's a lot more local, and you're going to need to collect less data because you're probably already familiar with many of the data points that you would need to know because you're living in that same community. So there's actually less information cataloged if you're doing it locally. Now, the alternative to tailoring a plan is to simply put a one size fits all plan that helps some people, okay, and hurts a lot of other people. As you might obviously know, the big bailouts for the coronavirus, um, I'm calling it a bailout. I know that some people might have different terms for it. It is focused on certain businesses. It doesn't help every single business. Okay, so obviously we're playing favorites here already. So and obviously many of those businesses are going to be collected in certain geographic areas of the country. But if you were to do it locally, you would be able to actually help the workers, okay, in the exact communities that they live in, so that they are helped. And in some situations, in some parts of a country, they might not need as much help there as they might need somewhere else. So, of course, then you have to do local tax collection, and there's different ways to do that. Um, I'm just in favor of decentralizing taxes to a degree that the central government puts a budgetary demand, and then that's filled from the local governments based on various types of taxations that are effective in their communities. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is that if we localize this, it suddenly becomes a lot more efficient, and it suddenly becomes a lot more personal and personalized and more helpful to the people involved. That's my opinion, and that's why I think this is better than having a big centralized plan that helps some people but ends up hurting a lot of other people and ends up propping up bad business models that can be argued are bad on the national scale, but on the local scale, it's actually a lot easier to see whether they're effective or not in those communities, and therefore whether the people in those communities, you can then ask the people in the community whether they want to uphold those businesses or whether they want to let them fail. Because sometimes the threat of failure is a very strong motivating force in the growth and in the development of new business models that are more adapted to the particular situation that the business owners and that the employees and that the surrounding community find themselves in. So tell me what you think in the comments section below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a different idea? Do you think that all businesses, regardless of how poorly designed their business models are, should be propped up? What do you think? Tell me in the comments section below. And I thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all next time on Wiltus Over and Out.